Right, onto this now. So various groups are still pushing for South African laws to be changed. This is to allow terminally ill adults the option of a dignified assisted death. The non-profit organization Dignity South Africa is planning to approach the courts to challenge the illegality of assisted suicide. Let's discuss this, though, with How to Die podcast host and end-of-life carer Sean O'Connor, who joins us now. Sean, good evening to you. We also are joined by Dignity SA's executive member, Joseph Raimondo. Guys, thank you so much for speaking to us. You know, we have this discussion as the UK's Parliament, for instance, just passed a bill allowing for assisted death. And Sean, you've written quite extensively about what having that law in place actually does. And I think I want to start there, right, with the end in mind, where we say, okay, the call for assisted death to be legal in South Africa, would we then see a rush of people running towards assisted death? You've written about this where you argue actually the opposite, Sean.
Hi, thanks Naledi. Thanks for having me on the show. I don't think there will be a rush. Very few people will qualify. It's envisaged in the UK that you need to be terminally ill and within the last 6 months of life and be of sound mind, have a High Court judge approve it, plus 2 doctors. So the safeguards are quite stringent. I certainly don't think there's been a rush anywhere in the world, and I don't think that will happen here either.
Yeah, very interesting. And perhaps that same question for you, Joseph, because and where we are with Dignity SA in the work that you're doing to get this conversation going here in South Africa.
Thanks so much, Naledi, for having me on. And I completely agree with Sean. I don't foresee a rush, and I think what is often misunderstood is how few people actually need this. It's a very important minority, but it's a very small minority of people who really need this. And I think maybe this is probably the right moment to emphasize that what's come out of the UK debates. And I probably want to say that it's just past the second reading of the bill, so it's still got 9 months to go before it actually becomes law in the UK, and a lot could change. So it's the start of the process there. But what has come out as hugely important is the importance of palliative care, which is not the same as assisted dying. It's the most wonderful branch of medicine which cares for people who are dying naturally, makes sure they're not in pain, they have social support, they have psychological support and spiritual support if they want. And I think people, the big concerns in the UK have been that without access to good palliative care, how could people make a choice to end their own lives? And what Sean is alluding to is, you need to be able to make the choice where there's no other options available to you. And so what's really come out beautifully from the UK debates is that so much investment needs to now go into palliative care to strengthen palliative care. And that's all really coming out of this push to improve dignity and end-of-life care more broadly. And that's something we're hoping to see in South Africa as well.
Yeah. What's blocking us here, Joseph? And I'm going to stay with you just for a second, right? Why are we not moving this conversation along in South Africa? What do you think are the main barriers that we're facing this side?
I mean, it's an excellent question. I think as a society, we do need to come some way to start talking about death more often. And it's quite understandable when actually, for many of us in South Africa, it's very hard just to stay alive, to have enough food to eat, to make a living. And so many South Africans are understandably concerned with just trying to make it through every day and don't have the space to think about what it means to have a good death. And I think we do need to grow those conversations, and especially in the medical community as well, where doctors understandably are trying to keep people healthy and alive for as long as possible. And sometimes the focus gets put on being kept alive for as long as possible without the best quality of life. And those are conversations we need to have more of as well.
Yeah. Sean, in this piece that you've written, Dignity and Death, Why SA Must Consider Assisted dying legislation. I must say that you make a point that I found so poignant. You write about how we live in a country, and I'm reading from your piece now, we live in a country where people are killed for their life insurance and funeral policies. Just because this happens, are we not allowed life insurance or funeral policies, or a death with dignity that ends a pointless and degrading pain? And I thought, gosh, it's almost dark, right? When you talk about how, these things do happen, but we're not giving people autonomy over the end of their lives. I mean, give that point to me, and I don't know if I, sort of put the idea forward as poignantly as you did in the article.
Yeah, I think that the debate is around autonomy to some degree. I think COVID really changed our relationship with death and helped a lot of people realize that we've lost touch with the value of death and how we want to die. I think many of us aren't really in touch with the idea of our own mortality, and we imagine that death is something that happens later, and when we get there, we'll probably have a good death. But that isn't actually very likely for many people. So we are looking to, really widen this conversation around what is a death with dignity, what is autonomy, what is consent, and how does that work with very, very thorough safeguards. And luckily, we've got many other jurisdictions in the world that have already gone down this road that we can learn from. So, yeah, that's really where we're at, I think.
Yeah. Are we perhaps struggling to move the conversation along, Joseph, because there's a sense that this is very much a conversation that is being had by those that can afford a lot more than what most South Africans can, right? That there's a class divide as to why this conversation is not taken seriously, Joseph.
I think that there is certainly an aspect of that there. And we should, I guess, keep in mind that there is fundamental inequality. If you have enough money, you could fly to Switzerland and end your life there. So there is a fundamental inequality that's already doesn't make sense, but I think you're right. And one of the common big arguments that people make is that if only 14% of South Africans have access to palliative care, which is what would keep you comfortable and make sure you don't have pain as you might have a terminal condition, how does it even make sense for us to be campaigning for assisted dying? Yeah. And I think I'm very sympathetic to those arguments. I think assisted dying only makes sense in the context where good palliative care is available, where people have all the best or appropriate treatment options, and yet still they're in intolerable suffering. And that unfortunately does apply to a small minority of people, where despite the best possible treatments that they have, they're still really suffering every day. And we want, especially when they have a terminal condition, we don't think that's, we think people should be able to have the choice to say, no, maybe I don't want to have the last 2 weeks in excruciating pain. I would like to have control of my final days.
Yeah. Sean, you're an end-of-life carer, and goodness, I'm trying to imagine just, what that work looks like and the conversations that you have with people when they're seeing the end, right? Moments that stand out for you about where, an individual that you were caring for really felt that they just didn't have necessarily, end things the way they would have wanted to. Some of those stories, if you will.
Okay, so thank you. Every individual is different, and it's my privilege to really show up and listen. I'm not there to give any answers in that very intimate space. And often people feel they need permission to die. They're holding on to something intangible. Maybe there's some guilt or some unfinished business. But that tends to sometimes prolong the sort of voyage toward death. And what we've noticed around the world is that when people have the option of a dignified death, it brings so much comfort at the end of life. Many people don't elect to use it. even if they do qualify. But that is I have a client who is a quadriplegic. He's been living on a farm with his mother in the middle of nowhere. His mother takes care of his every intimate need. And he has actually had enough. He's tried to starve himself to death before. That is a horrible, horrible way to go. And all he wants is an option. I don't think he will use it for quite a long time. But I know that he would be so comforted to know that he can die on his own terms. And I just feel, who are we to deny the right? Can we say that no one would ever qualify to do that? So it's a very small minority of people we're looking at. And, you know, just being at the bedside of people, death is... Leonardo da Vinci said, life is a brief pause between two mysteries. We only get one death. And I think it's been hidden from us for a couple of generations. You know, as medical science has progressed, we've lost touch with death and the value of death. And I don't know that we know how to die. So really it's so good to be, and very life-affirming, perversely, to be part of this debate, because once we start talking about death, we start talking about life.
Yeah.
And how to live it and how to treat each other. And that's another, you know, big plank of this movement, is it's very life-affirming, strangely enough. So, you know, there's a lot of relief to be found in this option, and that's what we really look and hope for.
Yeah. Joseph, I'm going to let you have the last bite here. Steps that and pushes that Dignity SA continues to, I suppose, take in the issue of trying to get it to be legal here in South Africa.
Thanks, Navivi. I think one thing we are extremely fortunate to have in South Africa is an incredible constitution and a Bill of Rights, which is actually something that's not available in the United Kingdom. We have these fundamental rights, the right to human dignity, to essentially bodily autonomy, to equality, to life. All of these things are beautifully enshrined in this document, which outlines the ethics of our society that we can look to for guidance. And I think, you know, in the recent, there was a 2016 ruling where the judges essentially said there is a contradiction between the common law in South Africa, which defines assisted dying as murder, and the Constitution, which enshrines all these rights. And we foresee a future challenge, kind of rectifying or providing clarity here. And so that's what we as Dignity South Africa are seeking to do. We are bringing a legal challenge initially to the High Court, but we foresee it going to the Constitutional Court. Ultimately, to answer these questions and hopefully to make assisted dying legal with the proper regulations, with the proper safeguards, which we expect Parliament to have to foresee and to develop, and to ensure all South Africans have the best chance of a dignified death, the best death they can imagine. That is up to them with their choice.
Yeah, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and keep us updated, Joseph, with the work that you do. We really do appreciate your time. Joseph is, of course, with the Dignity SA as an executive member, and Sean O'Connor is the How to Die podcast host, and also End of Life for Kira, doing incredible work. Well, that's where we wrap things up. Keep your WhatsApps coming in, and perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on that particular discussion. The number is 072-110-5584. You're watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We take a short break. We've got more news on the other side of this.